Hello, everyone. We'll just give it some time for people to join. I can see people are still entering at the moment. It'd be nice to see in the chat, to know where people are dialing in from, what your role is. Thank you all for joining today. It's lovely to see lots of you here with us today. Yeah, please let us know where you're dialing in from today. Newcastle upon Tyne, we've got Wales, Bristol, Port Talbot, Lisbon, London, Essex. Hi, everyone. Dublin, Birmingham, USA, Barcelona. Hello, everyone. Okay, we will get started shortly, just giving people an opportunity to join us. Thank you all for joining today. Okay. So, hello everyone. We will get started. I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for today. So I'm Rachel. I'm one of the senior business psychologists at Microlink, and I've worked in the space of neuroinclusion for over 4 years now. So in my role in particular, I do various things, including one-to-one support through services such as coaching for individuals and for managers, as well as things like co-coaching and completing assessments. And I also support organisations to ensure that they have the right support in place to ensure inclusion in the workplace through awareness training and consultancy support as well. So that's just a little intro into who I am. And yeah, thank you very much for joining. Got a few bits on housekeeping before we get into the session today. Live captions are available should you wish to put them on. And we will be sending a recording out to the email that you registered with shortly after the event as well. I'm also joined today by my wonderful moderators who will be supporting in the chat and in the Q&A section as well. Just to make sure that you're posting comments in the right place, you can please do engage in the chat by sharing your thoughts and your experiences. If you've got questions that you would like to be answered, please do use the Q&A function instead, and either my wonderful moderators will be answering those, or there will be some time for me to answer some questions at the end of the session today as well. Please do be respectful in the chat and be open to different people's experiences and learning. We want everyone to feel safe, heard and valued in our sessions. So now that part's done, we can get started with the session. The first thing that I would really like to know, and if you could put your answer in the chats, what has brought you to today's session? Is it that you want to learn some practical tips? You want to be able to support neurodivergent colleagues or other team members? Are you new to this topic and you're curious? Is your organisation focusing more on inclusion, or is it all of the above? I'd love to know, and I'm going to have a little look. So supporting role, for support and tips, being neurodivergent yourself, all of the above, that's all good. Excellent, lots of all of the above, and we love to see that, so thank you. Wanting to learn tips and wanting to be able to share information and support colleagues to increase understanding and support options, absolutely. And all of the above from a personal as well as professional perspective, absolutely. Thank you all very much for sharing the reasons why you wanted to join today's session. That is really great to see. And another question for you to begin with, what would you say is your biggest challenge when it comes to supporting neurodivergent talents? Would you say it's a lack of knowledge or awareness or uncertainty about accommodations, concerns about saying or doing the wrong thing, limited policies or support available, or time and resources. There might be some other examples that you have, so please do feel free to share those as well. But yeah, let me know in the chat. All of those, the time and resources, lack of knowledge and support, a few around lack of knowledge. I can see time and resources has come up several times. Concern about saying and doing the wrong thing. Understanding what adaptations can be offered, yes. Limited policies or support organisationally. I thank you all for sharing what those biggest challenges are, and we'll absolutely be exploring these areas in terms of, what can be done or kind of what organisations can do to help you sort of feel more confident as well when supporting neurodivergent talents. So yeah, thank you all very much for sharing. So just to start with thinking about some of those barriers then, some things that we often see in the workplace when it comes to creating effective, inclusive workplaces include one of the key things being fear of saying the wrong thing. And this can result in leaders and employers then not engaging in important conversations in order to avoid getting it wrong. I've worked with many organisations and managers, HR professionals who have mentioned that this is one of the key things that they're concerned about. But however, not having these conversations can have a detrimental impact to employees, teams, and the wider organisation. So it's important that we address how we can build confidence around this. Also, lack of formal training in neurodiversity. This can impact confidence amongst managers and HR professionals, as well as colleagues, with regards to supporting neurodivergent colleagues and understanding different ways of working, and also how to work neuro-inclusively, which has benefits for everyone. There's also concerns about legal missteps as well, and this is understandably a concern, but ensuring that support is available and that people know how to access this support and creating that neuro-inclusive culture is crucial for ensuring compliance. Also, pressure to perform perfect allyship. There are times when you may not get it perfectly right, but the important part is being open to learning and understanding, and all of you are taking the step by joining me today. In terms of the wins when it comes to supporting neurodivergent talents, we will also, through today's session, be exploring what small actions can be done. And it's really great to do things like sharing success stories that show how small adjustments can really increase success and comfort levels for everyone. And also another key thing is listening to those that have lived experience within our organisations, within our teams, because this can help with supporting our understanding of, emotional and sensory experiences, which can then enable leaders and HR professionals to feel more confident to act with empathy, and to help with supporting neurodivergent talent in the workplace as well. So by the end of the session today, the aim is for those of you joining today to feel more confident, more capable and better equipped to support neurodivergent colleagues. So what does confidence look like in practice? So some of the key things are, first of all, knowing that you don't need to diagnose or label someone. Also understanding strengths and challenges in a balanced way, and also myth busting to remove the fear of getting it wrong, because that can be truly harmful to neurodivergent talent within the workplace and can impact the ability to have that culture and that psychological safety that enables them to thrive and to have conversations about their ways of working. Thinking about those conversations, I want to start us off by exploring what confidence in having these conversations can look like. So what I want to ask you as well, and please do put your answer in the chat, what is a barrier for you when having conversations about support needs or ways of working preferences? What is a barrier for you when trying to engage in having those conversations from your own experiences? If you'd be happy to share in the chat, that would be great to know. Oh, thank you for other things being in the chat. So worrying about looking like we are prying. No, thank you very much for sharing. Patience and understanding. Some people can be embarrassed to talk about what they need. They may not have a diagnosis or awareness of their different needs. Making assumptions, yes, absolutely. And some people have lost all trust in the help that can be offered, fear to offend and use the wrong language. And some people don't know what they need to help them. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all very much for sharing those examples from your own experiences. So in terms of how to actually start these conversations, so starting conversations about neurodiversity can feel daunting, but it doesn't have to be. We first of all want to start by using open, respectful language that focuses on understanding needs rather than making assumptions. So we want to be asking questions like, what helps you to work at your best? Because even asking a simple question like that can open the door to really meaningful dialogue. And what is really important is having these conversations with each member in our team. Say, for example, you're a manager, having that conversation, when you start working with each person, to understand individual preferences and how people work at their best. And that also helps to foster that culture of inclusion as well, and creating that safe space where people feel like they are being listened to as well. In terms of what not to say, as someone mentioned in the chat, it's important to not make assumptions. What has worked well and has supported someone else, it might be someone else in your team you've supported previously. What has supported them may not be most supportive for another, or may not be the best approach. So it's important that we start by giving the space where we can listen to understanding each individual person. And understanding what their particular strengths are, what are the elements of their role that they feel like they excel in, and understanding if there are any particular hurdles or barriers that they are coming up against as well. Having practical templates for one-to-one support conversations can be hugely beneficial tools for organisations to have available. These can be massively beneficial to managers to feel confident in having these conversations, but these can also be beneficial for employees as well, because if this is a tool or resource that is available across the organisation, it can help to provide insight into what things may be discussed or what questions could be asked in these conversations, to enable people time to process what it is that they would like to be able to convey, and help them to feel more confident going into that conversation as well. Also clarifying boundaries as well. So you don't need to be a clinician, and it is not your job to diagnose someone either. The importance is on understanding an individual and what enables them to work at their best, and how any barriers or challenges could be minimized to enable them to thrive. And also it's important to understand that people that when you're having these conversations will be at different sort of journeys in their own sort of self-awareness and understanding. There will be some people coming into these conversations having a lot of awareness of what does work well for them, what does enable them to thrive, whereas others may be at the very start of that journey of understanding and they may not be sure. And so that's when we want to empower leaders and HR to feel confident to explore these conversations and to work collaboratively to understand what adjustments may be of benefit to them. Thinking a bit more about management practices, there are several things that can be considered. So first of all, structuring meetings to support different processing styles. So for example, this could include incorporating short breaks into longer meetings. It could be allowing transcriptions if possible, or providing agendas in advance as well. This can be hugely beneficial. So for example, thinking about the breaks, this can help with comfort and also with sustaining focus as well, by enabling people the opportunity to refocus as well, and to enable them to move about at regular intervals if that is what is of benefit to them. And also providing agendas in advance can be hugely beneficial by enabling individuals to prepare in advance contributions they may want to make or might help them to consider and sort of process the information that may be discussed and the topics that will be coming up, to help them to best engage and feel comfortable to engage as well in those meetings, which can enable you to get the most from your team members and to increase that collaboration. Providing instructions in multiple formats. So, for example, using visuals such as diagrams, or it might be showing screenshots, for example, if you were showing how to use certain systems in practice. Also, things like bullet pointed summaries and discussions being other potential formats as well. Because people do process information in different ways. And so if we're able to accommodate for preferences around that, that can enable them to best understand and retain that information as well. Recognizing strengths confidently during performance conversations. It really is important when thinking about building people's confidence in themselves and their abilities that we do highlight strengths on a regular basis. And it's also really beneficial to do that using examples of how they've demonstrated their strengths in their day-to-day work as well. And also highlighting the value that they bring to the team as well, and that their contributions and the ways in which they're contributing are value to the team, because that can in turn help build their confidence, which could enable them to continue to be providing these valuable contributions. Also managing sensory issues without making it awkward as well, because lots of individuals that I've spoken to, throughout my time working in this space will say that they know that they like to, whether it's use certain fidget materials or if they like to, maybe sit on particular chairs, for example, in meetings, but they can feel uncomfortable with actually putting those things in practice in an office environment because they have concerns about how it might look to other people or what other people might think about it themselves, which can prevent them from actually doing what they need to support themselves. But ways that we can do that without making it awkward can be as simple as providing sensory tools for everyone that are attending in-person meetings, because then it means no one's having to ask for them and they're available for anyone to use, or allowing access to quiet areas as standard and saying that that is open to anyone to be able to use if they need to be able to step away from a particular environment for a short period to support themselves, especially when there's things like open plan offices, if there's lots of noise, because that can be challenging for some neurodivergent individuals. Then thinking about accommodation and adjustment decisions. So how can we increase confidence in, making accommodations and adjustments for individuals and making those decisions in the workplace? There is certainly great importance of clear policy and procedures on how to ask for support or to get support implemented. And this is beneficial for HR professionals, leaders, and employees, because we want, HR professionals and leaders to feel confident that they know how to go about sort of making these decisions or having these conversations about adjustments. It's also hugely beneficial for employees as well to have those sorts of policies and procedures outlined clearly, because it then means that they know what steps are going to be taken or how they can go about seeking support as well, because that can create a barrier for someone accessing support is if they don't know what that process would look like or what it would involve in the first place. But the benefit is lots of really high impact accommodations are things that are either very low cost or are even free to do as well. So, for example, thinking about chairing meetings and doing this inclusively, which can include offering different ways to contribute. So, for example, being open and saying that if people would rather contribute via a chat function, or if they would like to be able to process the information and follow up in an email afterwards, that they're okay to do so. However, if they would like to be able to, to verbally articulate their thoughts, that's also okay. Providing agendas in advance of meetings to allow for processing time and preparation is another example of something that's really quick to do and doesn't add any cost, but can have a huge impact and can be hugely beneficial. Also thinking about how to co-design adjustments with the employee as well. So open conversations, as I mentioned earlier, starting by asking what enables someone to work at their best is a great place to start. And as I mentioned earlier and sort of touched on, so some individuals will have really good awareness of that, and they will have sort of a very clear idea of what it is that they would benefit from, because it might be that they had adjustments or support through education or in previous roles that they would like to be able to bring into a new role, for example, and want to explore the options for that. Whereas for other people, they may not have considered this at all before. So this is when it's important to focus that discussion around thinking about strengths and any challenges that are experienced within the role, because this can enable that collaborative discussion around how can strengths be utilized, how can they utilize and bring those strengths into the role even more if possible, and where are their barriers and how these could be minimized. So for example, if there is a particular challenge around maybe it's retaining information from meetings or the action points, is it that they're being access to a transcript, for example, so they'd have the documentation to refer back to, or sending, a follow-up email outlining action points? Is that something that is feasible and possible to do to support that particular challenge for that individual? It's also important that these discussions are revisited regularly to understand how the support is working in practice and whether anything needs to be adjusted, because it might be that through that collaborative discussion you agree on certain accommodations and ways of working to support, but until they're tried in practice, it can be challenging to know kind of what is the most effective way forward. So revisiting those conversations to say, okay, this was something that we agreed. How is that working for you? Is this something that you're finding beneficial? And if not, then exploring potential alternatives to find sort of that best way forward that works for both of you. Also, it's good to think about when HR needs to step in as well, because there are many adjustments and ways of working that are low cost or even free, as I mentioned. And so accommodations like that may not necessarily require involvement from HR. It might just be an agreement between a line manager and an employee. Support from HR can be hugely beneficial. For example, if a manager or the employee, would like sort of further support in the process of agreeing adjustments and having those conversations. And there are also some adjustments that may involve changes to working patterns, for example, that would then likely require involvement from HR, especially if it would mean a change in contract, for example, as well. But it is important that within organisations that HR and managers do work collaboratively, first of all by ensuring that information about how to access support is clearly available, but also being there to ensure that it's a sort of as smooth as process as can be to support everyone involved as well. It's also important to think about how to document support appropriately as well, because it is important that the outcomes of these conversations are written down and are documented, because this enables clarity for all parties in terms of what has been agreed and what support is of benefit to the individual. This is then also helpful to the employee, as if they chose to disclose any of the information with other people that they work with, for example, it can provide them a good sort of basis for those conversations. It's also helpful for managers in terms of a reminder of what's been agreed and what is in place. And then thinking longer term, having these kinds of documents in place is also of benefit, because it means that if someone was to change manager, for example, there is already sort of a starting point to establish those accommodations and ways of working that would hopefully then be picked up and taken forward by a new manager as well. Thinking about how this could be documented, there are several ways in which this could be done. A very popular example would be through something like a workplace passport. So this is a document whereby you would outline particular areas of strength, particular challenges in a role, but the particular focus being on what support is beneficial to someone, what enables someone to work at their best, and whether that's through things, for some people it might be through things like assistive technology, but for others it might be around sort of methods of communication. It might be, where possible, providing information in a visual format, or offering follow-up conversations when given a task, for example, if needed, to support with clarity. And so so these passports can be beneficial to document all of that clearly. But again, it's also important then when revisiting these discussions that the document is also updated as well, to make sure that it is up to date based on someone's role and responsibilities, in case there's been any changes around that, or if any particular adjustments or supports need to be adjusted for any reason as well. So one thing that I would ask you, thinking about making sure that support is easily accessible, would you say it's clear on how to access support in your own organisation? If you want to put your answer in the chat, please do feel free to. Okay, we've got some mixed responses in the chat at the moment. So yes, it is not at this point. It's a work in progress, not specifically. No, thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for sharing your experiences about whether or not the support is sort of easily accessible or identifiable in your organisation. We're building on it, so it's great to see that there's lots of you that are saying that if this is a work in progress, it's something that has been highlighted and is being worked on. Okay, I think I'd know where to start. Managers are very approachable. Yeah, someone's saying that they'll review to see how accessible it is for colleagues too. Absolutely, because as much as it is certainly important for HR and for leaders to know how to access this support, or kind of what steps to take, it's also important for colleagues to know how they can open that conversation, or how they could approach that if they wanted to access support, if they needed to access support for them as well. Thank you all for contributing to that. Okay, so I do have a few other questions for you as well. So first of all, if you could improve one aspect of neuro-inclusion in your organisation, what would it be? Would you say it is awareness? Would you say that it is manager training, communication and meetings, recruitment and onboarding, accommodations process? What would you say? Okay, so we've got several answers for manager training sort of straight away. Manager training, communications and meetings, all are important. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. They really are. Manager training and recruitment, manager training, awareness, all make a difference. Yes, absolutely. Thank you all. Making it day to day and not a big thing, absolutely. And I think this is one of the important things about as leaders, actually talking about neurodiversity openly in the workplace, and sharing success stories of where support has been beneficial, and also openly communicating about the support that is available in an organization as well, because by making it something that is discussed openly, it then creates that culture where people feel like it's something that can be talked about, and something that is okay to speak about, and that it is something that people will be listened to and sort of will still be valued for, to try and sort of minimize any sort of apprehension that certain people may feel about approaching those conversations as well. So I can certainly see that with these responses, there was probably an overwhelming majority that mentioned manager training being one of them. And I can completely understand and appreciate that, absolutely, because that is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a huge part of increasing that confidence around supporting neurodivergent talent, is actually having an understanding, first of all, of neurodiversity, and kind of increasing awareness of what neurodiversity is, what that means, how it can present in the workplace, and sort of also then understanding how you can go about sort of supporting those individuals, and kind of how you can approach having those conversations, as I discussed earlier. So that is certainly an important starting point to kind of have that educational piece and that awareness and understanding to increase confidence, absolutely. And it's interesting, I think I maybe saw one or two people mentioning the sort of onboarding side of things as well. And that's sort of really interesting because when we think about the sort of journey of an employee, that is the first step of it. It's the first step that someone will go through is that recruitment process. And then if they're successful, it will be that onboarding process. And there has been a lot of research that has found that neurodivergent individuals can be off-put roles based on the job adverts that they see, or if the processes in that recruitment process aren't clearly outlined, or depending on even how accessible the information is itself. How is it presented? Is it available in an accessible format, for example, for things like screen readers, for example, because that really does set the precedent and the impression that someone has of an organisation. And so it's important that off the bat there is that clear understanding that an organisation is one that will offer support and is open about having those kind of accommodations and things accessible as well. Let me just have a look. There's been some more in the chat as well. Let me have a look. Removing barriers without making the process too complicated and difficult for colleagues. Absolutely, because if it was a very convoluted process, that could absolutely be off-putting for individuals to then want to actually discuss accommodations and adjustments in the first place. So we absolutely want to make that as straightforward as possible. And again, I know I've repeated this and sort of mentioned this at several points during the session today so far, but I think it does come back to having those open conversations to understand an individual and their strengths and their challenges as a starting point, because again, as I mentioned, often it's the adjustments that are either low cost or no cost that can have such a huge impact to begin with, and not just for the individuals but also for teams as a whole as well. And let me have a look at what else has been in the chat as well. When employees know that managers have been trained, then they can be more themselves and therefore their best selves. Again, it's a great point. It certainly adds to creating that that culture of having that sort of safety to feel like they're able to talk about things. If they know that their managers have wanted to learn and understand and educate themselves on neurodiversity, it's thinking about sort of clients that I've worked with and kind of whether it's sort of through training sessions that I've done, or things like co-coaching with managers and employees, the huge difference that it makes when there actually is that space just to talk and be listened to as well, and for individuals to feel like their manager, it might be that they're not getting it perfectly immediately, because as I said, there are going to be times that we're not doing it perfectly, but just showing that you are open to understanding, open to learning, and are taking the steps in order to do that can make such a huge difference in someone not only feeling able to bring their authentic selves to work, but also enabling them to feel like they can approach their manager with that conversation, and to be able to seek support that they need to enable them to work at their best as well. Let me have a look at what anyone else has mentioned. Leaders that role model and kind of open up about their own lived experience. Absolutely. Sharing lived experience can be really powerful to do, because again, being able to share your own stories about your own experiences, as if you are neurodivergent yourselves, can be hugely impactful, again, in kind of showing that, celebrating the successes and the strengths and the values that neurodivergent people bring as well, and again can make people feel like they're not on their own as well. It can help them to feel seen and heard by others, but especially if it's leaders that are opening up those conversations and are sharing stories, if they felt comfortable to do so themselves, then that can have a massive impact on that culture and creating that space that is neuro inclusive. Absolutely. Thank you all. Okay, excellent, thank you. Now I've got another question for you to consider now. So which area would you say is something that you would most like sort of practical guidance on? Is it around the more recruitment side and hiring, the onboarding, day-to-day management and communication, the accommodations and adjustments piece, or around that sort of building a neuro-inclusive culture? All, yes, absolutely. So culture, hiring and recruitment, all recruitment, building a neuro-inclusive culture. Absolutely, thank you. Several people saying all, completely understand that. Someone said the implementation of adjustments, and I think that's also a really important point to consider and to think about as well, because obviously, yeah, the first point is having the conversation around what adjustments and accommodations can be put into place, kind of what is feasible, what is agreed as a sort of way of moving forward with that side of things. But it is important as part of that to also consider, but how is this going to be put into practice? So, for example, if there's been a conversation around communication preferences, about how, for example, maybe someone wants to be able to would benefit from having written follow-ups from a meeting using a previous example. It's okay, so that is something that maybe has been agreed between a leader and employee, but how is that then going to be put into place? How is that information going to be shared? Is it that there's going to be a transcript from the meeting that is then going to be shared around by the person who chaired the meeting, or is it that it's going to be a sort of shared responsibility to take some collaborative notes sort of as a group in that meeting? It's important for both sides to kind of understand not just what those accommodations and adjustments are, but what are the practical steps for implementing it as well, to ensure that everyone is clear on what that's going to look like in practice, and to still again make it a smoother process and a straightforward process as possible, by removing any ambiguity in that as well. Let me have a look. There's been some other messages in the chat, so thank you. Okay. Changing the culture will ripple and help change all the other points. That is absolutely a good point, because I think really that is sort of the foundational piece, certainly, because if you have a culture that is neuro-inclusive, that would then immediately mean that in terms of how the organization is presenting to talent that is looking for a job and kind of is looking at the job adverts and things like that, first of all, it gives that really great impression of you being an organization that is neuro-inclusive and values diversity of thought among people. And then that would then in turn, as you say, mean that the onboarding would consider the inclusivity and kind of best practice around making sure that from the outset someone's support needs and ways of working are understood to help inform how they're trained, or kind of what they may need support with, which then has a knock-on impact in terms of management and accommodations, and so on. So absolutely is a good point in that the culture really is that foundational piece to start with. Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you all. Then I have a third question for you, which is, which of these would most help you feel more confident? And do you feel that would be, having clear and simple guidance or examples, do's and don'ts, sort of almost manager scripts or kind of language tips, or understanding different sort of neurodivergent experiences? Please let me know your thoughts in the chat. Lots of real world examples coming through. Also, yeah, so real world examples coming through quite a bit. All, yes, absolutely. Examples and understanding experiences, clear, simple guidance with real world examples. Absolutely, thank you. All as they would assist with awareness training, awareness raising in the workplace. Absolutely. Excellent. Understanding different experiences and real world examples. Someone's also said mini case studies. Absolutely. and clear and simple guidance, yes. Like the opportunity to buddy and speak to others who are doing it right. I also certainly think that's a really good point as well, because I think that there's also the elements of lots of these kind of conversations and approaching conversations around support needs can feel very daunting, and so it can absolutely, that sort of level of peer support and kind of having the space to be able to talk to HR, talk to other managers around, in your organization around their experiences of kind of the going through that sort of adjustments process or accommodations process, those conversations can help not only with feeling more confident, but can also help with developing those processes in an organization as well, because it could highlight where maybe there are gaps in those processes, or maybe where more resources or more training is needed. And also it's always remembering that obviously that there are individual differences, which is why we want to have those open conversations with the individual to understand from their own perspective and from their own experiences what support is going to benefit them, because it also not only is the individual themselves, it's also the job role that they do as well, because depending on the particular role and responsibilities that they may have, it means that can also determine what particular accommodations and adjustments would be of benefit to them, and also what would be feasible and practical for them in their role. And again, this is where support from HR can be hugely beneficial as well, in terms of understanding based on kind of what those job needs and requirements are, but also taking into account, what the individual support needs are, to be able to explore what is a workable outcome and a workable way forward that works for the individual, as well as the manager and the organisation as well. And someone has mentioned workplace passport templates as well. Certainly there are lots of organizations that do have their own sort of their own passports that they develop for this process, and yes, so some organizations do develop their own. It is also something that we at Microlink could support with as well, if it was something that you wanted to get in touch with us for as well. And in terms of having sort of scripts and language tips as well, what I would say is that this certainly feeds into what was mentioned towards the start of today's session around sort of fear of saying the wrong thing, because when it comes to language around neurodiversity, it's a hugely personal thing. So to start with, again, it's about listening to the individual and understanding what terminology they like to use. So they might refer to themselves as being neurodivergent. They might say I'm an autistic person, or they might say I'm a person who has autism. So again, the language is again about taking the lead from the individual, and sort of being respectful and understanding that there are going to be personal preferences and differences. So again, that's somewhere that we don't want to make assumptions as well. But again, we don't want fear of saying the wrong thing to stop us from having the conversation. So again, it is hugely important that we take our lead from the individual themselves to understand what language they would like us to use, and then taking their lead from that as well. Thank you. Okay, excellent. So thank you all very much for mentioning kind of what part of the, what one of these options would be, what would help you feel more confident. So just to sort of let you know as well, in terms of the supports that Microlink is able to offer, we can provide bespoke supports for all of those areas. So whether that's doing audits on various areas of the employee life cycle, whether that is looking at recruitment as an example, and or even looking at things like policies and strategies, we could support with exploring your organization's adjustments and accommodations process, and sort of supporting collaboratively with developing that. The co-creation of resources such as toolkits as well that we can make bespoke for your organization as well. as resources that can be used by leaders, by HR, by employees. Also support with organisational development and change management, and also designing interventions to support with wellbeing and mental health as well. So if you would like to learn any more about our neurodiversity services at Microlink, or if you would like us to run a bespoke session tailored for your organisation, please do get in touch. The email is on this slide here, and these slides will be shared afterwards as well, so you'll have this information to refer back to. And please keep up to date with us on social media as well, so on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and we've also got our website as well where you can keep up to date with us. And so we are going to have time for Q&A now as well, but I appreciate that some of you may need to start dropping off soon. So just to let you know as well, we've got our next event on the 5th of February, which is about inclusion starts at the top, securing executive buy-in for inclusion. So thank you very much. If anyone has got questions that they would like me to answer, please do use the Q&A box at the top of the screen there. Just to make sure that I can see that. But if any of you do need to go, please, thank you very much for joining. But if you are able to stay and join for the Q&A, please do. And I will happily answer those questions for you. Okay, so there's one question that's been put into the Q&A that I can see that mentions, actually, let me just stop sharing my screen for this particular part. There we go. So we've got, with workplace passports, where would you recommend they are held? We currently give ownership to the individual it supports, so they and their manager can access a copy, but it's not held centrally with HR, which can flag up issues when adjustments aren't being stuck to, as HR doesn't have a saved copy to refer to. No, this is a really great question, so thank you very much. There is certainly benefits to enabling the individual themselves to have ownership of that document, especially because it's information that is so that is so personal to them, and so it's important that they do have an element of control of that information, because it would be up to them to decide who they are happy for that information to be disclosed to and who would have access to that information. And so this will certainly partly depend on the organisation themselves, yourselves, and the type of systems that you use, because it may well be that in order to ensure that it is easily accessible, not just for the individual but also for the manager as well, it may well be that there is a particular centralised system that it could be uploaded onto. It's just the thing to be mindful of is who else would have access to it, because as I said, we'd want to ensure that the individual is able to agree to and consent to that individual, is able to consent to that information being uploaded to that particular system, for example. So it may well be that as part of that conversation in creating that passport, it could be that you agree with the individual, where are you happy for this to be stored? Is it something that you are happy to be on the HR system, for example, if that's where it could go? And just making sure that they know who that means would be able to see the information, because yes, it is absolutely helpful to ensure that, in terms of reviewing the information and seeing how things are working in practice, it's a really good thing to be able to ensure that there is a centralized place that everyone's got easy access to. But yeah, the key thing is around the consent from the individual and ensuring that they're comfortable with where that information is held for accessibility. So thank you very much for that question. If there are any other questions from anyone at all, please do put them in the Q&A function. I will check the chat just to see in case there's anything else on there. The details for the session on the 5th of February, we will absolutely make sure that they are shared. There will be sort of posts up on our social media soon that will include the registration link. So please do keep an eye out for that. But details will also be on our website as well. But yes, we can absolutely make sure that we get those session details to you. Thank you. No, thank you for people that needed to go. That's absolutely fine. Let me check the Q&A to see if there's anything else. Okay. So would it be feasible to ask that a neurodivergent staff member request that their manager attend awareness/upskilling sessions to better support them? Would this be a reasonable adjustment? Um, now, so when it comes to that as a reasonable adjustment, well, the short answer would be yes, it's absolutely something that can be a reasonable adjustment. So for example, in workplace needs assessments reports that are, that we could write, for example, I've written many in the past where I have made the recommendation that an individual's manager or or team do awareness training, whether that's on a particular neurodivergent condition or whether that's on neurodiversity more broadly, just to because the aim is obviously that's to best support the individual by increasing that awareness and understanding, to enable them to understand how they can best be supported within their role. Of course, in terms of it being a reasonable adjustment, obviously any recommendations that would be made are at the discretion of the employer to decide on whether or not it is reasonable, but it is something that can be a reasonable adjustment as a supportive measure for an individual in the workplace. Let me just have a look and see if there are any other. Oh, I think there's been a few. Oh, there's been several questions that have just come in now. Excellent. So just to let you know as well that if there are any questions that we run out of time to answer today, you've got our email address again, so please, do feel free to reach out and we will endeavour to get back to any questions that we don't manage to answer today, but I will do my best to get through them now. So let me have a look. Okay. Is there a list of basic adjustments? So when it comes to adjustments, it's not that there is a set list of what could be put into place, because as I said again, it's something that is so person-centered, so individualized, depending on what their particular needs and preferences are, and also depending on the job role that they do as well. So it's not that there is a list that exists. There are examples of adjustments that can be that are sort of very often seen in organizations, especially, for example, thinking about the office environment. If there are roles that are in an office, it could be things like, for example, enabling someone to have a fixed desk in an office. So if someone experiences sensory challenges when they work in an office environment, particularly if it's an open plan office, some individuals may find that there's particular areas of the office that they find more comfortable to work in, might enable them to focus better. So for example, this might be being in a corner rather than in the middle of a group of desks. It might be in an area where there's more natural light and less overhead artificial lighting. And it might be a desk that is away from where people congregate, so it might be away from kitchen areas and corridors, for example. Of course, this will depend on the particular office layout that your organisation has, but those are some examples of what that might mean for someone who maybe does experience those sensory challenges in an office environment. Okay, let me have a look. Let's have a look. So what is the impact if we don't build the reasonable adjustments? How is this related with mental health? Because managers that are focused in driving results may see this as unproductive. So it's certainly the impact if reasonable adjustments aren't put into place. There are several impacts. There's certainly the personal impacts to the individual employee. There are many individuals that I have worked with over my time working in this field where if they've not had any support put in place at all, it has had a detrimental impact on their mental health. It can massively increase anxiety and stress. It can hugely impact mood as well, which is obviously having a detrimental impact on them personally. It can also have a huge impact on sort of people's fatigue and energy as well, because if there are no adjustments in place, it does mean that neurodivergent individuals are much more likely to mask, and maybe masking all of the time if there is no support in place, which is then making things more effortful for them and is, draining energy. And also it can mean that neurodivergent individuals are doing a lot more to try and sort of manage the challenges. So for example, it might be that if someone is experiencing challenges with report writing in their role and there are no adjustments or support in place for them, it might mean that they are working far beyond their hours in order to keep up with deadlines and to get things done on time as expected, which again leads to, when I'm talking to these individuals, it might be that they're saying, well, their team actually doesn't realize that they have those challenges because they're doing so much to mask it. But to the detriment of the individual is huge. And, that could have a massive impact on organizations in that, people may choose to leave their roles in the organization because of the impact that it's having on them as well. But of course, there is also the impact it has on organizations, thinking about one of the sort of concerns I mentioned earlier about things like legal repercussions as well, because it's something that organisations have, a duty of care to do, is to put those reasonable adjustments in place for those that need it, as thinking about the Equality Act, disabilities within the Equality Act. And although not all neurodivergent people would refer to themselves as disabled, neurodiversity is a protected characteristic under the disability facet of the Equality Act. So it is important to organisations from that standpoint as well. But it's certainly very important to consider the personal impacts that has on individuals as well. Okay, let me have. Oh, there's been several questions. Thank you all for putting your questions in the Q&A box. I'm just having a look through. Okay. So someone has put a question around diagnosis. So is there advice on how to approach or support someone towards having their needs recognised if they have no diagnosis, and also helping them recognise their own adjustments? I appreciate this can be a very sensitive to approach to do likely past stigma or misdiagnosis. No, thank you very much for that question. This is a really important question to consider. So an individual does not need a diagnosis in order to access support in the workplace. So that is the first important thing to note, because there are some organisations that have the misconception that they would require a diagnosis to be able to give them support, and that's simply not the case. So if someone doesn't have a diagnosis, but if it's that, you're having a conversation with them and they mention that they would benefit from support in the workplace, or maybe they're finding certain things challenging in their role, this is when, we don't want to be focusing on a label or a diagnosis. The focus should very much be on what those support needs are. And as I mentioned earlier, it may well be the case that if someone's only very recently decided that they want to have these conversations and they now feel comfortable and safe enough to be able to engage in those kinds of discussions, they may not be completely sure themselves. So that is when I would advise focusing that conversation around their strengths and their challenges in their role as a starting point, because that then can help to identify, okay, so these are the elements of your role that that we can see that that I am excelling at, or that they feel most comfortable with, but there are these certain tasks that maybe they're finding more challenging. And so then it would be about collaborating with them to understand, okay, what is it that could be done to try and minimize those barriers and that impact, and could help to further utilize strengths within their role as well. And there may be an element of a bit of sort of needing to try some things out and kind of revisit as it goes on, because that individual will be on a learning journey themselves in terms of understanding what support is best for them, because for each individual they will have their own particular preferences and ways of working, and even thinking about people that do have a diagnosis, not everyone with ADHD experiences the same strengths and challenges, same with dyslexia, autism, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. It's important that we just approach each person as an individual, and just approach it with listening and giving them the space to speak and to feel heard, as that starting point. But it is certainly a really good point, and the key factor of that particular question is that an individual does not need a diagnosis in order to be able to have support at work. Well, time has flown by with this as we are approaching the end of our session today. So I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you so much for engaging in the chat and sharing your experiences and your thoughts. And thank you for all of your questions as well in the Q&A. As I said, please do reach out to us via email if there's anything you want to hear more about, or if there's anything that we can do at Microlink to support your organisation on a more tailored level. Please do get in touch and let us know. But yeah, thank you all very much for being with me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.